A couple of months ago, I made a video of some of the things that I felt were the shortcomings of the new neural DSP Quad Cortex. I think it's completely understandable that after waiting nearly a year for delivery, many people were dissatisfied with what they felt like was an overpromised and under-delivered product, especially after a price increase putting it in the same range as the king of all modelers, the 𝗦𝗦𝗡𝗂. But some of you felt like I was being unfair, and although I did mention the things that I enjoyed about the Quad Cortex in that video, I felt like making this video was a necessary response. So today, I'm going to go over some of the things that I like about the Quad Cortex and offer my opinion on whether or not it is worth buying, especially after the hype has worn off and they've had a substantial price increase. What's up everyone, my name is Taylor, welcome to the channel. Today I'm going to share some opinions about this beautiful piece of hardware, the Quad Cortex. When it comes to the Quad Cortex, there are really some mixed opinions and reviews out there. Some people are absolutely in love with it, and some people are extremely disappointed, and everyone else is sort of indifferent. I fall somewhere in the middle of all of these opinions. On the one hand, I think it's extremely capable, and my main purpose for using it is the capture feature. On the other hand, when comparing it to something like the 𝗦𝗦𝗡𝗅, it does leave a lot to be desired, not only in terms of the amount of effects and tweakable parameters, but just in the sheer lack of customizable options. In fact, without the capture feature, which in and of itself feels a little bare bones, the Quad Cortex feels kind of anemic by comparison. Add to that a nearly 15% price increase and you start to feel like maybe this was the wrong investment for all of your tone-questing debauchery. And if you are a fan of the phrase tone-questing debauchery, make sure to let me know by hitting the like button to appease the YouTube gods. As a matter of fact, when I was contemplating this exact topic and deciding if I should just sell it, I received this comment. And that really got me thinking about how the marketing and the development of these products has changed from the old school Pod 2.0 Red Bean days. Even back then, there were significant improvements via updates as well as a pretty hefty firmware update that included the addition of new amplifiers and cabinets, but since then it seems that companies are more heavily relying on their ability to produce a product that can be relevant for 6 or 7 years and worry about rolling out the software features and firmware updates later. While this has been more true recently for the big names in this space like the Helix and the 𝗦𝗦𝗡𝗅, none have so heavily leaned on this model like the Quad Cortex. Like I mentioned in the previous video, Neural DSP has been pretty open about this as well, mentioning through their website that the Quad Cortex was always the goal of the company Neural DSP, and the plugins were more or less just a way to raise the capital necessary to develop it. Now, along the way, they have created some of the most prestigious amp modeling plugins in the industry, and a big part of the success of these plugins are the design elements, which can be found all over the Quad Cortex as well. All of this I covered in my previous video, but we will touch on a lot of this again as I think it's pertinent to answering the question of whether or not these units are worth the $1,850 US price tag. The first thing I want to discuss is the capture feature, since that is probably the main selling point and arguably the best thing the unit has going for it. The fidelity of the captures is really good, and it's also really enjoyable to capture your own gear and share it on the Quad Cortex cloud and download and sample other people's captures as well. A huge criticism I initially had of the Quad Cortex was that by not facilitating a marketplace, or at least creating a way to make capture downloads and uploads possible outside the Cortex cloud, was going to limit the amount of professionally captured tones that were going to be available for the unit, effectively shooting themselves in the foot. And while I still think that's a valid point, I want to add to it a little bit here since I've had some more time to delve into captures and the community in general. It turns out that some of the people or companies making professional captures have figured out a way around the system and created ways for you to purchase these captures anyways, albeit crude and sort of a hassle versus your typical e-commerce transaction. But the point here is that the professional captures do exist and they are out there for purchase. But to be honest, I don't think it's really necessary. I think that there are a lot of great captures out there people have shared for free, including myself, link in the description if you want to follow me and download my captures. And while I could potentially see myself going deep parameter tweaking and making some really kick-ass captures for sale, I think for now I'm just going to see how things go over the coming months and what changes they make in the capture sharing arena. I still really hope they change the model to make it more similar to the Kemper and to create a marketplace to incentivize the quality of the captures, but it's still cool to be able to test out other people's gear digitally over the internet. Another criticism myself and many others have of the Quad Cortex was its almost anemic amount of effects and lack of amplifier models you would expect to find in a multi-effects unit in this price range. Well, I do still think that's true. Since that video posted, Neural DSP has actually released multiple updates, most of which have been quality improvements and bug fixes, but they have added some amps, cabinets, and overdrives and effects. My hunch is that they were probably planning on adding new effects and models soon after the release, but you know, pandemics can really mess up your business plans. I think the fact they have been steadily releasing updates shows their commitment to keeping the Quad Cortex as a frontrunner in the amp modeling world for the foreseeable future, so hopefully these updates will continue to roll out and we'll get some more effects and amp models. That isn't to say, though, that there isn't a great amount of content included with the Quad Cortex already, but it just has some big shoes to fill if it's going to stand next to modelers like the Axe-Fx and the Helix. Now, when it comes to the routing options, the Quad Cortex has a ton of flexibility in this arena, and probably the best implementation I've ever seen with any modeler, since utilizing its touchscreen makes routing signal chains pretty easy and intuitive. Now, it doesn't have some of the robust routing that something like the Axe-Fx has, but it comes really close. And if you really get creative with the effects loops, you can probably match a lot of the routing options in something like the Axe-Fx 3. So I think here the implementation is spot on and that they really nailed it, especially with this being a floorboard and not a rack unit. Although, if I'm being honest, I might prefer this as a rack unit. The idea of using the Quad Cortex on the ground in a venue and stepping on these foot switch / rotary knobs, or potentially tripping on a dimly lit stage and stepping on the gorgeous touchscreen kind of freaks me out. I think in that case, you definitely either want to use some sort of protector, which you can buy online, but they will obviously stop you from being able to use the touchscreen, or you could put it in a rack drawer, somewhere back off the stage where drunk bass players can't step on it and it can safely be controlled via MIDI. But again, that kind of defeats the purpose. And I want to be really clear on this. This isn't because Neural DSP made a product that feels cheap or flimsy. Actually, quite the opposite. They made a product that's so good and so beautiful that I'm just terrified something's going to happen to it if it's on stage. I much prefer using this on my desk, which, by the way, if you own a Quad Cortex and you don't have one of these laptop holders, I highly suggest getting one. They're really great quality, and I can't tell you how much better it is to be able to see what I'm doing and have more comfortable ergonomic implementation while using it. It's very similar to the stand that was used on the old Pod 2.0 Bean I mentioned earlier. Anyways, I'll link these in the description. So to sum this all up, I think there might be some validity to this early adopters idea. I mean, those of us who purchased our Quad Cortexes early got them for 15% cheaper than they are now, and with the rate of inflation, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw another price increase sooner than later. And while it's not the absolute pinnacle of multi-effects and amp modeling technology that it was hyped up to be, there is a lot of potential there. In the future, I really hope to see more amps with deep parameter editing. I would love to be able to swap different tubes out or to mess with settings like negative feedback similar to the Axe-Fx. But one of the best things they do now that I hope really gets expanded upon future updates is the layout of the amplifier settings and the recreation of amplifier-specific options that are seen on models like the Freeman 100 with its separate FAT, C45, voice, and saturation switches. I would like to see the amps consolidated in the same way, with different channels existing as a switch on one of the pages in the amp block. I think that part of the reason this may not exist currently is because doing so might make the list of amplifiers look skimpier than it already is, but in all honesty, I think this would be a big improvement, and also just something completely different and better than their competitors are doing. I mean, imagine if you could switch between clean, crunch, and lead channels on an amplifier without having to load different amp models. That would be awesome. The last thing I would like to see added is more global features. It's really surprising to see a modeler at this price without a global EQ, and while it might not need one to hide its high-end digital artifacting like some cheaper units, it's still nice to have so that you can get a baseline EQ for whatever room you might happen to be playing in, or if you are using it through an amplifier and a cabinet. All in all, I'd probably buy it again even at the higher price. I feel like with Neural DSP's track record for making excellent plugins, this thing is going to be a monster one day, even if it's a little underwhelming now. They already nailed the hardest part, which is creating a product design to match their company's aesthetic, while also maintaining enough forward-thinking features like built-in Wi-Fi. Wait a second. I didn't mention this earlier, but built-in Wi-Fi is awesome. I love not having to search for and download firmware updates and use some third-party software to install it, like I'm some sort of torrent junkie trying to download the new Metallica album. What was I saying again? Oh yeah. Enough forward-thinking features to make sure that the hardware can survive well into the future. Now, the only thing for them to do is what we know they already do best. Make excellent software that will push the Quad Cortex over the line and make it a true contender among its peers. Alright, I hope you guys have enjoyed this video, and if you have, make sure to let me know down in the comments. And if you like this video a lot, you can subscribe for more, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye guys.